to the Dadhammer podcast, where we discuss all things Warhammer. I am your host, David the Warboss, and I am joined by my friends, the Bearded Ogre, back from Nurgle's Plague, has returned. How you doing, my friend?
Doing great, fantastic. So, Ray, glad to be here.
No more sickness. Glad to have you back. And of course, the ever present. Well, most of the time anyway. It's like you're always present except when you're not. Medicae Steve. Steve, how we doing?
Good. I prefer omnipotent, but we'll go with ever present. That works.
Yeah, I remember
I'm great.
my teenage son when he was a little younger. He would say something like, "Dad, we're awesome, aren't we?" And before I could answer him, he's like, "Well, except when we're not." That's about
Covers
right.
everything, man.
We're pretty awesome, except when we totally aren't awesome. So we'll just stick with that. Well, we have a great show lined up for you. We are going to talk a little bit about the tournament scene. They have recently announced the U.S. Open Series for Games Workshop doing a U.S. tour, and there's several cities announced. We're going to talk about those, the tournaments that have been announced, and also really on the prep. If you're going to go attend one of these tournaments, if you want to enter one of those. Stu has been to several, so he is our resident expert, our field expert, and we've got several things that we want to discuss with him. Steve and I have never been to one of these tournaments before, considering it potentially in the future. So we're going to grill Stu to get all the goodies on what his experience has been, and then we will also discuss the getting into 40K, what the best armies are. So anyone considering going to a tournament, maybe you don't have an army or you're considering getting into Warhammer and thinking about starting a new army, recently put up a video showing the top 5 40K armies to start with for new players, or really just anyone looking to get into the 40K universe. So we're going to talk about that. We've got a few differing opinions that we're going to share based on, the video was just my opinion. So we've got a few other things to talk through there. So a lot of good stuff to get to. Thank you so much for listening to our show. As always, if you like what you're hearing, make sure to give us a like, subscribe, follow, all the various words on all the different platforms, because we're in several places now. Really appreciate your support. And then you can see us on dadhammerstudios.com, where we post all of our content, some articles, opinions, and lots of cool stuff. Finally, if you want to reach us or need to have some questions answered, you want to see some new content on our podcast or maybe on our YouTube channel, you can email us at contact@dadhammerstudios.com. So please do that. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, with that, let's get started with some content related to the U.S. Open series. So for those that are not aware, the U.S. Open, as far as Warhammer is concerned, it's not a sporting event. I mean, I guess you consider as esports is the thing. What would you call T-sports?
T-sports.
Tabletop sports. Like, what is a sport? Really, what is it? TT sports.
Yeah.
I
mean, unless there's sweat and
there's plenty of sweat at these
days.
I mean,
yeah, but I'm not talking about like diabetic and heart disease sweat. I'm talking about like exertion.
Well, there's probably some physical exertion too. You gotta lift with your knees to get the army on the table.
Yeah. I mean, when you're walking from like table 10 down to like table 50, I mean, it's a pretty long walk.
You get your steps in for sure. Mm-hmm. Like my son's always asking me if I've gotten my steps in. And I'm like, yeah, I got to walk up the stairs to take my army up to the table. There's a lot of exercise and physical exertion going into this. Anyway, I digress. There have been some dates announced for the U.S. Open coming. Well, one of the ones that we're looking at potentially attending, I'd love to, is the one in Atlanta, Georgia, which is closer to where we are in Nashville, Tennessee, and hoping to make it down there. That'd be really cool. I think just a really cool experience. So if you're interested, please check out the website, and we'd love to hear from you if you've been to one of these tournaments before. Pretty cool scene. And, I've seen lots of videos and pictures from these. Everyone that goes to them always talks about how much fun they have, all the cool people they meet. And honestly, yeah, we poke fun, at our own problems of exercise. But going to any type of event, even if it's not Warhammer related, where you are surrounded by other people that love the thing as much as you do. And I've been to E3, the well, rest in peace, the old video game expo that used to be there. I've been to that, and that was such an amazing experience. You're just surrounded by people that are just as into your hobby and your passion as you are. So it's just cool to go to an event like that. And this, from all the videos and pictures that I've seen, is exactly the same way. So really, really cool thing. And whoops, I went a little too far on the pictures there. So I want to bring up and talk a little to Stu, to you, about, you've been to these tournaments. We've talked with you about attending, maybe not these specific tournaments, but one of the questions that I've always had on my mind is, if I were to attend one of these tournaments, and I've been playing the game for a little while, like I'm even though I played tons and tons of 40K games locally, there is this divide in my mind between being a casual, player to get together with friends and throw some dice, and then entering into a tournament. There's like this, maybe a stigma or hesitation from me and Steve. I know we've talked about it. Like, well, I'm not good enough to enter a tournament. I can barely remember the rules of the game, or my army, or what if my painted army doesn't look as good. So I maybe, Stu, this is the first question I want to ask you. How do you go about preparing for a tournament? Maybe mental preparation, or anything, maybe especially when you first started and you first got into a tournament and you jumped the shark, you entered your first tournament. What was the thing that got you motivated to do it? And maybe what were some of the concerns that you got over as just getting into the tournament scene?
I mean, I agree. I got an article on the Dadhammer website that kind of talks about this a little bit. Go check it out. And but yeah, I mean, the first one I actually went to was actually here in Nashville, called NashCon, and it was I went because I had friends going, and that's probably my biggest advice is make sure that when you go, that you go with friends, because that makes the experience a lot better to be with. Because I mean, unless you're a very extroverted person, you're going to be surrounded by thousands or hundreds of people, and to be with people that you feel comfortable talking to and hanging out with just makes the experience a lot better. But I mean, I'd say probably, gameplay wise, still bring the army that you love to play. I wouldn't worry about bringing, the meta list, or just bring what you think you're going to have fun, because you're going there for yourself. You're not going there for everybody else. And if what you're playing is what you love to play, then bring that, and then just face the dice as they come, So, yeah, I mean, I love going to events and tournaments, just because, I mean, you see, like you said, Warboss, you're surrounded by people that love the same stuff that you do. I mean, it's just cool to have that camaraderie, and actually see the scope of how big, your hobby is, and how much joy and love is brought to it, and you just see things that you wouldn't experience and stuff. So.
I think too, just, there's got to be some, just like with anything, put yourself out there. There's got to be some benefits, right, of going to a tournament, doing that for the first time, because anytime you challenge yourself in life and you get past your box, your defined box, your safety net, right? Anytime you push yourself to get outside of your comfort zone, and I consider myself more of a little bit of an extrovert, more of an introverted extrovert, if that's a thing. I'm a day walker. I'm some weird hybrid where I can get in front of a room. I actually like doing the camera stuff. I've done the videos and all that. I enjoy doing that. but there's also a side of me that wants to, lock the door and stay over in the corner and just, look over my Warhammer stuff at the same time. So, from your perspective, you mentioned bringing friends and making friends potentially at some of these events. What is that one of the big benefits for you? Like if for someone like me thinking about attending, and maybe I take friends, maybe I don't, right? If I would love for us all just to get in a big like party wagon and go to an event, but life gets in the way sometimes. Yeah, like a road trip. But what are some of the benefits that you've gotten out of these tournaments? Has your game improved? Have you just met new people? What are some of the things that folks that are listening to this can look forward to by entering a tournament?
I mean, game, no. Like I said before, I'm a bottom feeder. Okay, I'm always at bottom tables. Like, I mean, I start off strong. But by the end of it, at the bottom. But I'd say for myself, since I enjoy the hobby aspect of the of our hobby, it's probably that, like, seeing all the different armies that people have made and the painting and the creativity of the models that they have. Because I mean, a lot of people also, print 3D stuff, like 3D print stuff. And so you see cool models that way too. It's not all just, the big man GW, like a lot of people bring all kinds of things. And the display boards, like that's another thing. It's just the creativity people do of display boards. I mean, it's just, for me, like, if you're wanting to improve anything, whether it's hobby, whether it's gameplay, even whether it's just your own, be a better social dynamic with people. Like, I mean, it's just, it really helps out with any of those things. I mean,
is there a lot of kit bash stuff? I mean, I was under the impression that at these tournaments, it's got to be strictly Games Workshop plastic with only Games Workshop paints. I mean, that's what it seems like sometimes, right? That you have to fit into this little box or you can't go. Do people still bring 3D printed or kit bashed armies, or is that frowned upon?
Oh yeah, 100% all the time. I mean, unless it's literally sponsored by GW, it's free reign. Like, I mean,
I didn't know that.
To a T. Like, if it's pretty out there, I mean, most likely you're gonna have to get approval from the TO, the tournament organizer. But I haven't really came across like a tournament yet where it's like that you can't use that. I mean, I literally.
So if I brought in like He-Man Battle Cat, right, and said this is battle wagon for the orcs, they'd be cool with that. I'd be like, yeah, bring it.
I mean, if it fits the theme of like what your army is, I mean, I would, yeah. I mean, I was about to say, like, there was one time, there was a person that played Corn and he forgot his altar terrain piece for AOS, and he went to the TO and he was like, hey, can I use this realm gate as my altar? And the TO said, yeah. As long as your opponent's cool, you ask your opponent first. If they're cool with it, then yeah, you're more than welcome to use it. So,
that's good.
So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, there's plenty of converted 3D printed armies, especially at the tournaments that aren't really like sponsored majorly by Games Workshop.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool. I was always under the impression that you had to have very specific. You could only bring Games Workshop stuff, and even then, you have to the models that you assemble have to look exactly like the models that you're going to field. I'm sure that's the case maybe in the ultra high competitive tournament, super hardcore scene, but I mean, so if I rolled in, and I am joking about Battle Cat with He-Man, but if I rolled in with some custom stuff, really what it comes down to, what I'm hearing you say, is that as long as your opponent's cool with it, then you're there just to play games. I mean, you're going in there not to quote unquote win. I'm a competitive person, but more of a casual competitive person. Yes, I want to win, but not at the expense of the fun, right? So, I mean, I think it's good to hear that most most tournaments and most players are pretty cool about it. And they just want to get together and have a good time, throw some dice. So my next question for you, let's assume then, let's move it on, one extra step. Let's assume that I'm ready to attend one of these tournaments. And my biggest thing is that because, I'm Dadhammer HQ here, and I've got all the terrain and the space for everybody to come over to play Warhammer in my house. I don't have any transportation. Like I've never really transported any of my armies. So that's one of the biggest questions I would have, outside of buying something really expensive, because Games Workshop sells their Citadel cases, and those things are like $200 for to be able to transport half an army. So what do people use? What have you used in the past?
I mean, it really depends on whether you're planning on driving or flying to whatever event you're going to. Driving, I mean, a lot of people just use plastic bins, and then either that's what it is, it's just a plastic bin, and they keep it in their models in there, or they convert it in a way to where they add like sheets of metal, and then they have magnets on their models to where they don't move around and stuff. If you're planning on flying, I mean, you're going to have to invest in a really nice case. I mean, because walking through, the security, I'm pretty sure
I can't even imagine.
They're not going to let you
think about it.
Yeah, like if they're not going to let you go through with a clear case filled with all this stuff in it. Like,
my Chaos Space Marines with all the spikes all over them. There's no way. They'd be like, sir, we're going to need a triple pat down. You got to go to the back here and get all of your legionaries looked at, because they look like a deadly weapon.
So
I can't imagine.
I've had friends that have flown, and they've, like I said, they have like Magna racks and all kinds of stuff. And then they bring it on as carry-on luggage. Like, you definitely don't want to put those.
Oh, God.
You definitely don't want to put those in the carriage. Like, it's definitely gonna.
Oh my gosh, I can just have these nightmares of the TSA. I don't know what you call the people that actually take the luggage and put it on the plane. Like, just picking it up and tossing it, down, and oh my gosh, about thousands of hours. Steve,
I can hear the sound in my head of the little models breaking and shattering.
Oh my gosh,
just so painful.
Nightmare. What have you used? I know you've had to transport a couple of times to different places. What have you used, and for as far as transporting your armies?
I have nothing like specific, no specific product that I've purchased.
Cookie sheet. Is that what you're using?
Cookie sheet. I have started putting magnets on the bottom of all my bases, and they stick perfect to an old cookie sheet, and I can set it in the bottom of a cardboard box or a plastic bin, whatever I need. And man, that's really working. You'd be surprised. I think you could probably put most of a 2,000 point army on a cookie sheet.
Yeah.
I put two combat.
It depends.
Yeah, I put 2 combat patrols, and I had plenty of room left over.
Yeah, cookie sheets are pretty popular. Like,
yeah.
They're cheap, right?
That's working.
You go to Walmart.
It's cheap,
get those,
and I'm cheap, so that works out good.
Yeah, I've never had to transport, and the one time I did, we had a game day at Mechanical Keyboards. Shout out to the local place that we tend to go to. We're gonna have another game day here in a month or so. But when we had our game day there, this was the first time I actually had to transport away from my house, and it dawned on me, like, I don't have a way to get this stuff over there. So I had like 5 shoe boxes. And it was not elegant. I don't have magnets on the bottom of the bases, because why would I need them up until the time that I actually need them? But I think putting the magnets on the bases, getting them painted up a certain way is all for the preparation. Going back to the tournament question, transportation is one, but Stu, I'll go back to you. When you go to these tournaments, is there a certain aesthetic that you look for? Because I would imagine, at least I'm thinking about me getting prepped for this, that there's a pressure for getting your armies to look a certain way, to a certain standard, because you're getting ready to put them in front of somebody that may have just this immaculate presentation and are the best painter in the whole world. Is there that pressure, or have you been just a couple of times and you're like, yeah, nobody cares, just go in and play the game?
Oh, I think it just depends on person to person. I mean, Most tournaments, they only have a 3-color minimum. So as long as there's 3 separate colors on your models, you're viable to play them. So, I mean, which gets a lot of fuss from, players because, I mean, we're all there to actually like paint really good looking models and play against someone with good looking models. But I mean, there's been drama online of like people only getting, spray painting them red, blue, and white, like, and then that's considered,
come
valid,
on, really? Has
Yeah.
somebody actually done that? That's so bad.
Like it's so yeah. I mean, but so to answer the question, I mean, I think it's just down to the person and what you're trying to go for. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, if you're going for first place, best overall, you might put in enough effort to make them look good, but not enough to get like best painted, or like or whatever. So it just kind of like what's your flavor of tea, like, I mean, just if you want to go all out for the hobby award that's going to be presented at that tournament, I say, yeah, bring your best foot forward. But if you're wanting to go for a different award, like you could slack off a little bit, but enough to where it's enjoyable for your opponent to look at as well. So.
I gotcha. Well, so Steve, what about you? Let's say that hypothetically, right? Eventually, we're going to make it to one of these things, right? That's the goal. Right. That's the dream.
Come on down.
Let's say we're gonna go do this. I'm trying to think. What army would I take? What am I most confident in? But even then, it's not necessarily about confidence. It's just about making a statement. Like, what's the army that even if I go down swinging, I mean, it's got to be Votann, right? For me, I think it got to be Votann or orcs because I don't want to transport that many orcs. But well, nowadays Votann's more of a horde army, unfortunately. Anyway, but what would you go with? What would your army be if you're going to play 40K? So that's first question, and then second question is, would you go for any type of aesthetic, or would you just roll with whatever you had time to put together and paint?
I would definitely go with my Dark Angels, just because I know the army more or less. You've played against me. I really don't actually know anything.
You know enough.
But yeah, I know enough. But I got such a nice wide variety of things already done. And they are pretty cohesive, right? I've done a little bit here, a little bit there where they all look maybe a little different, but I didn't go too wild or too off book for that army. So that would be good for me to go with. And I like them. I enjoy playing them. If they go down swinging well, and they look good doing it. And they do look like, Christmas elves, as you've told me, but that's cool. I'm not hurt. It's okay. Santa's little helpers, they're good. They're good. But I have to tell you, if I had the time and the preparation and I was really wanting to start kind of from scratch, aesthetically, I would think about the Necrons because I think I could paint them up fast, but make them look pretty cool, and stick with the lore to a degree, but I don't have to stick to the box art or anything like that. Space Marines are funny. I found that the hard way with Dark Angels, and you start getting too many like weird color combinations because you want to do this, and now I've changed my mind, I want to do that. And then you got too many models, you're like, well, I'm not going to repaint all those.
Yeah.
So you want some cohesion there. I don't know. It's intimidating to think about it all the way around because, I'm kind of lackadaisical about winning. I don't really care if I win.
See, I can't. That would be the difficult thing for me. I'm way too hardcore, and I'm not. I would get probably a little anxiety leading up to the tournament because even though I know I don't know the rules well enough to make any kind of real statement or impact, of all these people. I don't pour over the details enough. I'm not smart enough to memorize everything, and I'm more of an in the moment type of a general when I play Warhammer. Sometimes that goes really well, sometimes not so well, but I just thinking about it, like, well, if I'm going to go down swinging, I'd go down with my favorite army, even if they weren't the top of the meta,
Right.
I'd do it anyway, just
Yeah.
just because, right? Because you want to wave the ban. It's almost like in collegiate sports. If your team, or professional sports, if you're a sports fan and your team is just not doing so well, it doesn't mean that you throw away the jersey, right? You
No.
still root for them. You don't
Mhm.
you don't burn it, right, and root for the next team. Unless you have multiple armies, and then now my example's starting to fall apart. But you get the idea. It's the main thing.
I tell
But
people all the time, like, I have high dollar fishing rods because I like to fly fish. And I assure you, my cheapest rod that I started out with, I cast is just as good with that
yep,
one because I cannot outcast equipment. Just like I can't outplay the rules, I can't
Mhm.
outplay these armies. I'm just not there.
Yeah.
you
If there
still
was a
need
Leroy,
custom dice. You still need custom dice, Steve.
I'm getting there.
Let's
I'm
just be
getting there.
clear.
But if there was a Leroy Jenkins award in these tournaments, I'm your
Yeah,
guy
you
because
win.
you played me
Well,
somewhere
that's
around round 3. I'm like, all in, baby.
see, that's the funny thing too, is that a lot of tournaments now they've got a thing they call a wooden spoon, which is
Oh
like
yeah.
the person that's at the
Oh,
bottom of the bottom of the bottom.
yeah. Who
Like,
loses the
yeah,
most?
and they get celebrated almost just as much as first place. Like, I
Oh, that's
mean,
me, baby.
so
That is me.
I actually had a friend of mine tell me, he was like, you know what, Stu? You should just like go around to tournaments to try to win the wooden spoon. Like that's the like you could just have all these different wooden spoons as your trophies of like, yeah, I lost here and here and here and here. So so
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
think I don't know, just to kind of round out the segment on tournaments. In the past, I've always seen these announcements come up on the Warhammer community site, and I'm like, okay, tournaments. The only time I got excited about it was when uh, it would come with a preview. Right, they're going to preview new models. They're going to do an online preview to show off all the new stuff. So most of the time, I get excited about the tournaments because they're going to reveal new Warhammer models. Now I'm starting to think, maybe it'd be cool to go to one of these things. And Stu, after talking with you and just you've eased my concerns and fears about walking into an ultra competitive landscape. There's for sure that with I'll throw the image back up where it's got like people in jerseys and Stephen
oh yeah.
Box, friend of the show with Vanguard Tactics. They've got their jerseys and they're all out there, and it looks like, oh man, these people really know what they're doing. And I'd be rolling in with I don't know, some kind of like hoodie or pullover instead, and looking very unofficial. So that would be the only thing. But I think just embracing the fact that you're really going just to play the games. It's kind of like going to Vegas, setting your expectations that you're going to lose money or that you're not there to win. You're there to experience and have a good time. Is probably what I'm hearing from you, Steve, is the best approach. So
Well, yeah. I mean, and one last thing I'd like to throw in too is like you don't have to go to these events for the tournament, because a lot of these tournaments or events have open gaming tables for anyone to
Oh,
use and whatever. So if you wanted, don't sign up for one. Just come to the event, enjoy being around everybody, enjoy going to all the vendors, and just play with your buddies or play with a new person you've run into that plays the same thing you do on these open tables. And then you'll just have a week or 3 or 4 days, however long it is, to just have fun. That way there's
that's
no
cool.
pressure for you to like,
that's
oh, I've
brilliant.
got to win an award, or what if someone says something weird about my army or whatever like that. Like, no, man, like they've got, yeah, they are catering for you. So, I mean, yeah.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking all the questions and us grilling you on the tournament scene. I think I'm gonna have to check it out in the future. So,
Mhm.
if you're listening to this and that's something that you have done before, if you've attended one of the tournaments, shoot us an email. Let us know what your experience has been and any advice for us. Or reach out to us on Instagram at Dadhammer Studios and just let us know. We'd love to hear from you and what your experience has been, because I'm starting to think maybe I'll dip my toe into the tournament waters in the future. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
get them floaties on, bro.
I
Ah,
know I got to get the floaties, the swimmies. Well, with that, as far as kind of getting introduced to the tournament scene, I think staying with that theme, uh, potentially our listeners that are looking to do that, maybe trying to get into a new army. So the next segment that we wanted to talk through is about some of the best starter armies. And I made a video, and I'll plug our YouTube channel, where I made a video around what is the best first army for you to roll with 40K. So it's an opinion piece. And, I was talking with the team here, and I said, okay, I had some picks for the best starter army, and everybody's going to have their opinions. This is based on my own personal experience, and I definitely go check out the video for the full deep dive, but I wanted to put up at least my original thoughts, where of course I'm going to start. Orcs are one of my favorites, so I hit orcs, Tyranids, I did Tau, I did Necrons, and I thought, for example, I thought that a lot of these, Steve, you mentioned it with Necrons being really, really easy to paint. They are not easy to assemble. Well, I guess the newer ones are a little easier to assemble. They push to fit. But those old ones with the Lego, death ray on the top of them, the neon green thing. Oh man, I don't know why those things were so terrible to put together. But the modern ones are a little easier, but they're so much easier to paint. So, Steve, I wanted to get your take. We'll start with the Necrons and maybe just your general opinion on this being a decent starter army. But if you're thinking about going into a tournament and you're looking to start a brand new one, either combat patrol and then expand your force out, do you, as a Necron player, do you think this is a good starter army, or would you disagree with that?
I do now. 10th edition for sure. 9th edition, no way. They were very difficult to wrap my head around. Now it's a lot more streamlined. The detachments are just easier, and I think it's really cool because you have a lot of options with Necrons, but you don't have to get analysis paralysis. You have a lot of great characters. I think you get a lot of points for your money. So if you're looking at budget, I don't think you have to spend a fortune on this army. And you can make a real neat army and not like go broke doing it. The rules are better than they were in 9th. 9th was just an absolute nightmare trying to figure out Necrons, because there was about 4 pages in different parts of the codex that you had to flip back and forth through. And now you could pick your detachment, and it's a couple pages. And I think you could say that about most of the codexes now. So they don't have a ton of shenanigans necessarily. So there's not a bunch of bookkeeping to deal with. They're pretty hardy. They come back. You get to bring models back, which is a feel-good thing, even if you lose. I played my son with Combat Patrol this weekend. Of course, he picked Eldari for his first army, and I could still scream about that. I mean, it's the hardest army to put together. It's the hardest army to paint, and in my opinion, even as many games and stuff that I play, it's one of the hardest to play. But he muddled through it, and he did okay. But he was so bewildered. Like, he was like, "What do you mean they could come back?" I'm like, "Man, they're machines." And it's just like that feel good moment. I mean, not curb stomping a 13-year-old, but for the record, he ran the table
deserved
on
it.
me.
He deserved
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He deserved him to come back, but he still ran the table eventually. But now, man, Necrons are, I think, a great place to start. And they're a fun army, and I feel like they were underrated, or just, I feel like people feel like their aesthetic isn't what a lot of people like. I think you can say that about the Tau in some ways. People love them or hate them. I don't know, man. Necrons are just kind of cool. I'm an 80s kid. Terminator, that was the best thing in the world. When that came out, it was mind-blowing. And I still have, just look at them now, I'm like, that's just a nostalgia hit, and I love it. I just like them.
Yeah, I always liked it. I played against he's now 15, but one of my kids was big. I say in past tense, was big into Warhammer with me for a little while. And then, as I've mentioned on the show, he discovered Fortnite and Valorant and Rainbow Six and all this other stuff. And sadly is not wanting to play Warhammer anymore. But what he picked originally were the Necrons, and I thought and I'm not sure why. I still don't know why. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad. That's not a negative. I never understood why he picked them out of all of them. But maybe the robot, thing was
Yeah.
appealing to him at the time, because I think he was 10 or 11 when he really showed some interest and wanted to play Necrons, and he loved the fact that it was annoying to me that they would die and then reanimate and come back. I was just so annoying, and he loved that he could. But one of the things that I wanted to mention too, and this goes into the list of the top 5, and one of the armies that I mentioned were the Tau, and the same reason for that I picked the Tau as a good starter army for maybe someone that is looking to get into 40K and doesn't want the overwhelming complexity of an army with lots of nuance and all of that. I picked the Tau and the Necrons because of the ranged and the range shooting. It just gives you that buffer so that you can sit back and still have a good time, even if the melee is coming or you're going to be overpowered by someone who really knows how to move and take advantage of cover and the benefits of cover and the terrain and all of that. You can still sit back with a shooty army and have a good time for a little while. It reminds me of the days when I used to play StarCraft in college with my buddies. I was terrible at StarCraft, and I would get overwhelmed with all of the extra things that you had to go and the resources that you had to gather. But I would just play the Protoss, and I would just build all these cannons and just sit back, and I could exist. I was never going to win, but I could exist and play and feel like I'm part of the game just by sitting back and shooting from afar. And that's one of the reasons I liked it. And so I think if you're going to start out, maybe not necessarily in the competitive scene, you can build up, any of these armies to be competitive. But to me, where you want to land is something that gives you some time, in-game time to think about what you're going to do next. And you can sit back and shoot and maybe then get tabled turn 2 or 3 by somebody that's really good. But at least you get the first couple of turns, as the point. And I think that one of the armies that I didn't include in my list, and I did want to bring it up here. We cover the Necrons. I didn't include Space Marines in my list of armies for starters because they're the poster child for 40K, right? They're all Space Marines are all over the place. But Stu, I wanted to get your take because I know that you're primarily Age of Sigmar, but you have dabbled in 40K and you picked Space Marines to start. I personally, and I started with Space Wolves. One of the reasons I listed in the video that I don't necessarily recommend Space Marines for new players as their first army is because there are so many options. I mean, it's both a plus and a minus, in my opinion. There's a ton. You could do whatever you want, and there's tanks, and there's, the Space Marine stack of cards that they released with the data sheets, when they released those things. There's just so many options. And to me, it's overload. It's like having all the choices on the menu, and usually that's a bad thing when you go to a restaurant and they have 20-page menu, that, okay, that means that some of the stuff's just not going to be good at all. But I don't know what to pick. So somebody pick for me. Stu, what was your experience when you're coming from Age of Sigmar, different game, into 40K, starting with Space Marines? Did you have the overload, or did they playing Age of Sigmar and just being a Warhammer player for a long time, did that help you translate over into the Space Marine side?
Yeah, I'd say so. Especially now with 10th, there's a lot of similarities between rules between AOS and 40K. But yeah, I guess the reason why I chose to go with Space Marines is just because, really, I had a test model already that I got for free for going to a tournament that I went to. And I just wanted to paint something not AOS, and I painted it. And I was like, oh, I like this color scheme, and this looks pretty good. And I'll make up my own chapter, and run with that. So, but then I saw Adeptus Custodes, and now I'm kind of leaning towards starting with that combat patrol because I don't know, they look sick to me, and they're an elite style army, which that's kind of what I like, army wise, and so yeah. But I do agree, like. I mean, Space Marines have all the options in the world. Like it can get overwhelming at times. To like, do I want this lieutenant? Do I want this, kind of bike? I mean, do I want to use scouts? Do I want to have veteran guard? Do I want to have stern guard? Yeah, the list can go on and on.
It's just so many. And Steve, when you're primarily Space Marines when we've played, and maybe this is not true for you because you have played so many games with Space Marines, but when you're looking to expand, with Dark Angels, it's a lot of Terminators, especially lately. But when you're looking to expand, is that ever a problem for you? Like, are you like not sure what to do? Do you go tanks? Do you go bikes? Do you go infantry? But a lot of these units can't exist on their own, at least not, they're not punchy enough, right? You know what I mean? Right. So has that been an issue for you when you're trying to expand your army?
So I think when you're starting out, Space Marines are okay. You can learn the basics with them fairly well. If you want to start winning with them, you really have to dig in and figure out what's going to work best. And I'm not talking about meta lists and stuff like that, but I'm literally talking about dig out that codex and index and look at what units are going to help each other, because they're high point units, right? So you don't necessarily get a lot for your points. So you need to make your points count. And something that looks cool and flashy might not be worth the points to put on the table. But there's so much stuff out there. It's analysis paralysis. So you can't really move forward because you're like, I just don't know what to do because it all looks so cool. So that it's just this really, really double-edged sword with Space Marines. And I think you were right in leaving them out because it's the safe call, because the whole company dumps so much emphasis on Space Marines that it's really difficult to say that they're not good, for beginners, because they really push it. I mean, like you said, Stu, that's the free model they give you. That's the sniff of the crack in the store. First one's free, man, here, and it's always a Space Marine, So that's like,
it's the reason why there's a reason why the plastic's blue. Okay, it's blue crack. You know what I mean? So
that's right. So it's just so weird that it's not, once you dig in, it's not the most beginner friendly army.
I didn't think so. I just, like, when I first started with Space Wolves, they're very melee heavy, and but then when I wanted to branch out, right, I would get like, I want to get some snipers, but that does, you don't really get the benefits of using snipers in a Space Wolves army because they're primarily, now it's changed a little bit with 10th edition, but I think because they don't have any single thing that they just do really, really well, it's hard to know where to focus your attention. Like as a collector, a builder, not necessarily as an opponent, but how do you know where to build? Because there's nothing, like, if you look at Tau, I mean, they're adding Kroot, right? It's going to be more melee, but if you look at Tau, okay, they're going to be shooting, so you know that you need to shoot. Like, that's the thing that you got to do with. And there's nuances to every army, but I'll pull up my favorite, the orcs, right? I mentioned Votan, but orcs are very basic and easy army to play because you collect a bunch of stuff, you build a bunch of crazy models that all look absolutely insane, and then the strategy is there's definitely some strategy, right? There's a lot of different things that you can do. But the bulk of my strategy when I first started is just to rush up the field and get them into melee as quickly as possible and hope you survive. Yeah, that's the game plan. It's very Mad Max. I mean, you think about, if you've seen Fury Road, that is the strategy. The the crazy people are just rushing and get there as quickly as possible, even if half your army dies in the process. As long as you get into melee combat, it's a win. And that's a very easy concept for a new player, that they don't have to worry about all these synergies. And that's what I'm saying with a Space Marine army. You got to think about a lot of synergies. That's part of the issue, in my opinion. So, Stu, when you're talking about running Custodes, being an elite army, I mean, there is some, I guess, comfort in knowing that you've only got a few units on the board. And I like running knights, Imperial Knights or Chaos Knights or something. You only got these big bodies to figure out what to do with. And I think that's a benefit. I think Tyranids, are very similar. And being a horde army, the one downside maybe for new players is just the sheer amount of volume that you have to deal with. And there's the feel bad moment where your opponent's going to come in and just completely torch your beautifully painted miniatures, right? That you've just spent all this time on. And now I used to call orcs like popcorn, right? You just pop them off and just, and everybody feels great. But it's like, I got 150 models on the board. So, that's just something to contend with. Stu, I was going to throw this back with you. We go away from 40K for a moment, thinking about Age of Sigmar, where, when I first started out picking an army for Age of Sigmar, I ran Skaven, thinking they would be very similar to orcs and I could be able to grasp them a little easier. And I found out that no, Skaven are actually pretty complicated because they're weaker than orcs. They're not as tough as orcs are. And so you have to have the synergies there to really figure out how to keep your little rat guys alive going into the battle. So from your perspective in the Age of Sigmar world, what are some armies? I mean, are the Stormcast the poster boys, and girls for Age of Sigmar? Is that a good starter army for new players to go with? Or, I know you play some different ones.
My advice is go towards the Destruction faction for stuff. A lot of those are elite armies. So, they're big boys. They got a lot of wounds. They hit pretty hard. So and like with the Custodes, you're saying, like, you don't have to have a lot of them, to get at least a good 1,000-point list together. Ogres are in that area. I'd say the Iron Jaws out of the Orc or Oruk book. Book would be another one. I mean, Stormcast are kind of going down the vein of the Space Marines of having a lot of options right now. But I mean, they are pretty good. They're pretty chunky. The stuff I would say in like Death are more of the synergy stuff. Like, they're very weak models for their troops, but their heroes give a lot of buffs. So it's a lot of like paper remembering. Chaos
sounds like a lot of math.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Chaos, I would say a good starter army in Chaos would probably be Khorne. It's a smash and bash type of army. I mean, it can get kind of synergy-ish, but I mean, the army-wide rule literally is like blood tide points, and so if anything dies, you get a point for it, and the more points you accumulate, you get to bring stuff back or summon stuff to the board. So that's pretty cool. In the order side, like I said, I'd probably say Stormcast, but there are a lot of order armies that are very synergy based. Cities of Sigmar is that way, I would think. Fire Slayers are kind of synergy-ish, but I mean,
I tend to look for maybe, when I went with Skaven, the idea was that they would be horde based and easy for me to grasp and to know what the strategy is. And what I found out with them is that because they are so weak, you have to, and you mentioned having a lot of heroes to buff them, and they didn't have a ton of that. I mean, they didn't have any kind of real crazy heroes that would buff all those rats. It's more about, like, you have to think about all the dominoes that are going to fall well in advance, because your heroes aren't overwhelmingly strong. Some of their ranged and even their melee is fairly random. Why I was kind of drawn to them with the orcs, but it's just you wouldn't think that keeping a ton of rats alive would be that difficult, but for me anyway, it was fairly complex. And I in contrast with 40K, I haven't experienced that as much. Now, I haven't played Tyranids yet, so maybe I'll see that then. But with orcs, the toughness was so good that I could roll the boys into a front line and do a bunch of melee, and they might die, they might not, but it was always, I guess, a satisfying thing that even if I wasn't going to win, I knew that I was doing what the army was designed to do. Versus Space Marines, and Steve, I played against you a couple times where we're playing and you've got some you got a dreadnought over here, and then you got a tank over here, and you got your Terminators, and then you got intercessors and flamers, and and it's like, okay, where is my real strength of this army, and what should I do next? And so that's why, for me, and maybe I'm just limited in my mental capacity, and I'm not smart enough to play Space Marines, but I just think there's just way too much, because as a brand new player, and I've taught several people how to play Warhammer, as a brand new player, just learning how to move and shoot and know which dice to roll and all these abbreviations and acronyms, that you don't learn that and really understand that until you played like 5 or 6 games minimum.
Agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
And then you got all the Space Marine stuff and the Oath of Moment and the stratagems, and then you got to have this unit next to this one to give the buffs, otherwise it's going to get shot off the table. I don't know, Steve, has that been your experience when you've played like Dark Angels, especially when you first started out, or maybe when your sons played as well?
Yeah, because especially if you're trying to play smaller games, right? One of the problems with Space Marines, and this is a negative, is that those buffs and things like that really push you and lead you to duplicating a lot of units. And if you're in this like we are, we don't really like to do duplicates. We like to kind of feel out the whole range and all that stuff. Well, it's really hard to make a full range work in a Space Marine army. You kind of have to dig your heels in and go to one play style, which means you're going to have a lot of duplicate kind of models. You're going to have a lot of shooty intercessors. You're going to have a lot of Terminators. You're going to have to do a lot of bikes with, White Scars or the Raven Wing for Dark Angels. You're going to lean into all the melee stuff with Blood Angels, so you have to make a decision on what you want to do. And that kind of stinks if you like the models, you like painting models, you like looking at models, you like collecting models. It's really hard because, believe it or not, 5 intercessors will die pretty easy. Yep. I mean, I know they're 2 wound models and they got all this toughness. They don't pump out a lot of shots. I mean, necessarily. They don't deal a lot of damage, and they die easier than you think they do because they're a small unit. So I don't know. I don't want to call it a horde army, but it's like an elite horde. Does that make sense? Like they're a little bit, I don't know. And it makes it hard for someone to decide because you get like a start collecting box and you're like, oh, what do I do now? What we touched on earlier, and you can take a wrong fork in the road and, not make it to Albuquerque, so to speak. And you're like, well, do I backtrack now? And I don't know. You don't want to spend dollars fixing, regret.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest challenge. I remember when I first started playing and I walk into the store, and the inevitable question that everybody asks is, okay, well, who's the best? What's good?
Right.
And then the person that's the manager of the store is going to tell you, well, there is no best army. They're all great. They're all balanced. And part of that is true, but it also depends on how how capable are you of being able to manage. Stu, you mentioned the paperwork and the math that's required in some of these armies. How mentally capable are you of handling all of that? And there are some armies that require that more than others. And so it's always weird when I hear the answer to that question. It's like, well, what do you like to play? Are you more of a ranged player? Are you more of a melee player? I wonder, and Stu, I'm interested in get your take. Like, it's just not just from Age of Sigmar, but just in general. I wonder if the question might be better served if somebody asked you, what army should I start with in Age of Sigmar or even 40K? Is the question a better question, that you could respond with is, well, what type of game do you like to play? If you're a D&D player, for example, I don't really like to play magic casters in video games or necromancers because that's just more to manage. It goes back to my StarCraft thing where it's just too much going on. So it's like, it doesn't really matter if I love shooting or melee if the army is so difficult. And I liked the look of Skaven. I liked the whole grimy, dirty, gross, rat infested kind of thing. I like that aesthetic. But if the army is so complicated for me to manage, I'm not going to have a good time. And so I wonder what would, Stu, from your perspective, are there other questions that new players could be asking instead of what's the best army, or I like to do ranged or shooting or melee? Are there other questions that could be asked to narrow down the choice to make it a little easier for them to decide?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, the second half of this hobby that we do is the building and painting. Like, I mean, you could ask like, well, which army can I build and paint the fastest? And because I think Necrons are a good one for that. Like, buy a metallic spray paint, get a wash, and get a highlight color, and you're good. Like, that's a low investment, but yet you still have a good, pleasing enough army for people to enjoy, to look at, and also yourself to enjoy. But also looking at it from other games too. Like, if you're big into video games, like, what type of video games do you play? Are you a first person shooter? Do you like adventure games? Do you like, RPGs? Like, that definitely helps, guide the person into what kind of army that they're going to want to invest into. So,
yeah, I guess it comes down to aesthetic at the end of the day. Do you like the look? Is the look of the army going to drive you beyond, or going to drive you to learn more from the strategic standpoint? If I like an army and the way it looks so much that I can put up with some of the nuance, I can put up with the complexity because I like how it looks so much. Steve, has that been? I know you're looking into Slaves to Darkness, maybe a different Necrons and Custodes. I know you're a different type of player, but has your experience been like, as long as I like the look, I'm willing to deal with it? Or has the look and the aesthetic boosted your understanding or desire to understand and get into the details a little more?
I think as I've gotten more experience in play, I can, if I like the aesthetic of something, I can deal with the complexity a little bit more. I like the slave, like we were talking about AOS, I like the Slaves of Darkness army because it's a rather static product line, if that makes sense. There's only so many units to purchase, and you could really buy one of each and round out a 2,000 point army, and you're pretty well balanced. It's done fairly well. I would throw out there, except for the expense, I think the Gene Stealer cults are kind of overlooked. That's a pretty static product line. There's not a ton of units, kind of similar to your Votan. I think they're a little complex to play, so that's a definite negative. But they do get a little pricey to collect because I think their models are just more expensive for what you get. And I start looking at stuff. I don't mind painting. Like, I take entirely too long to paint models to the level that I get them at, but it's part of the fun for me, and I get a little too fussy about stuff that no one will ever see but me. So I may not be the best advice giver on that part, but I think you can keep yourself humble by looking at the things that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get something because it's easy. If you're not happy with it, you won't play. You might even dump the hobby. So you're going to spend a lot of time on this. So, I like I said, I keep bringing up my son. I was like, you picked, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. That's the army you picked. But I love the little guy for sticking with it. And he's like still pumped to this day about it. And I'm like, and that, when I see that, I'm like, well, maybe I don't have the best advice all the time on that issue, because he is pumped about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's what it comes down to. I think, the video that I posted, I try to put some things for people to consider. And that was the one piece I listed top 5 armies that I think people should look into as new players. But I also had some heavy caveats at the beginning that there are a lot of decision factors, and the rule of cool trumps every single thing. So if you think the army looks awesome, you're going to be willing to put up with just about anything that it throws at you. And like, yeah, it's hard to play, but man, it sure does look cool when I do this or when I paint them. So I think it's a good point. I think as long as it looks good to you, you're going to end up being satisfied with the end result, even if you have to, dig a little more into the army and from the strategic standpoint. So,
well, plus, I mean, like, that's like how they get you to buy them all. Like, it's like you walk into a game store and they've got a rule Bible that you got flip through to find what you like. It's like, well, what looks good to your eye, like,
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I mean, depending on the game store, they might have some free rule books laying around that you can flip through, but like overall, most of the time they don't. And it's just like, what looks cool to you? There you go.
Yeah, back in the day, like when we did the NES box art, right? You always looked at just the screenshots, and that was your purchase decision. So I think very similar in the realm of Warhammer. So good discussion. Hopefully our listeners found this helpful, that if you're looking into either get into one of the tournaments or just trying to dip your toe into 40K, we've got some varying opinions on this one, but I think either way, rule of cool is the number one thing. And if you could find an army that you like, that's what you're going to be happy with. So hopefully this was helpful to you. Thank you so much for listening. As always, we will catch you next week. I am David the Warboss. Thanks to the Bearded Ogre and Medicae Steve for joining. And we will see you guys next week on Dadhammer. See you later.
Peace.
See you guys.